Have you ever been asked to photograph a wedding and in the heat of the moment you've said, "Sure thing," yet deep down you're secretly shitting your pants because your entire life you've been told you're inadequate, you're too small, you're no good at night, you lack any sort of ability? Well, not all is lost, because I'm here to give you my top tips on shooting with this system as a first and a second shooter. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, let's go. So of course I wasn't referring to your personality in the introduction, but I was referring to a fun-loving little Micro Four Thirds camera system and how it might not traditionally think of it as the first choice for wedding photographers. Well, unfortunately this is often the stigma around any form of Micro Four Thirds system for paid work, and something that can often make one second guess whether these tiny cameras can actually hold up to the job. So, by the way, if you're interested in seeing what can be done with this system, check out my video here for some crop sensor goodness. Now, if you are new to this channel, my name's Matt Horspool and I'm an Olympus OM System Ambassador based in Sydney, Australia, who pre-COVID specialised in adventure travel photography. But with borders shut, it's an excellent opportunity for me to pursue and build up a portfolio of wedding shoots and really hone my skills in what I honestly believe to be one of the most stressful and chaotic genres to photograph. In saying that though, there is no better way to develop your abilities as a photographer in general than by shooting weddings, at least I think. So you literally need to learn to adapt to incredibly dynamic lighting situations, pick compositions in a matter of seconds, all the while when switching between apertures and mixing shutter speeds of half a second through to thousandths of a second, all within minutes. It's pretty hard, hey? So my heart's racing just thinking of it all. So if you are here watching this video, you are likely keen to use this awesome little system to photograph your own weddings. However, this information can be applied to all forms of photography, not just weddings. So before I begin, I want to make it clear that I don't consider myself an elite wedding photographer by any means. There are incredible photographers out there who do nothing but shoot award-winning images for high-paying couples, and many of these people offer specialist advice to take your work to the next level. So I highly recommend you give their videos a watch first, or second. But for me, I hope I can give you some tips and tricks to help you set out on the right foot, squash mistakes early and get that muscle memory happening on the correct techniques. I am also going to leave a link below to a free cheat sheet checklist you can run over before each wedding and ensure you have your cameras set up and ready to go. It's invaluable, I think. As usual in all my videos, I'll leave timestamps to each point I cover, so I highly recommend watching over this video in one go, then re-watching with your camera in hand and pausing to stop where you change the settings. So I think that way you can not only remember what I told you, but have an opportunity to play around with the settings at a much slower pace and not worry about what's coming next. So tip number 1, camera choice. So get to know your camera. Now this might seem obvious, but when shooting weddings you often don't get a second chance to replay a moment. So you need to know your camera and its capabilities inside and out. So notice that I didn't actually say you need to purchase the most expensive Micro Four Thirds camera. This is because a competent photographer can capture more amazing shots on a lower grade camera than someone with little know-how using a pro grade camera. Trust me, I've seen it before. So for this reason, I'm actually not going to recommend any cameras here. But for me, I shoot with two EM1 Mark IIIs with an EM1X as backup, but would be confident in using something like an EM5 Mark II to shoot if need be. I'm hoping in the future I'll get my hands on the new WOW camera though, so if that sounds like something you might be interested in seeing, hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you can be the first to know about that. Who knows? Tip 2, lens choice. Lens choice is a highly subjective topic, and indeed everyone has their own personal preferences based on the overall look, its usability, availability and cost. But for me, I almost always use the 4 Emswico Pro Primes, the 45 1.2, 25 1.2, 17 1.2 and the latest edition, the new 20mm f1.4, which you can watch here, my in-depth review up here. So I find over the majority of the day, I have the 45 on one body and the 17 on the other, only switching out between the 45 for the 40 to 150 f2.8 Pro when the ceremony happens so I can stand back. But most beginners won't have access to these Pro Primes, So the good news is there is a vast variety of cheaper and readily available Micro Four Thirds lenses on the market that will do the job just fine. And if anything, they may even give you a little less clinical character to your images, because some of the Micro Four Thirds lenses can be really, really sharp and overly clinical. More character, better pictures. So if you are looking for a single prime lens, then the MSYSTEM 17mm f1.8 Premium will get you out of most trouble. It's wide enough to shoot most groups, yet still pleasing to capture portraits, the perfect documentary style focal length. And for a 2-lens setup, you can't go wrong with adding the 45mm f1.8 to the arsenal. This will give you that added reach and give you some creamy portrait action. So for those of you who prefer a zoom lens route, you can't go wrong with the MSYSTEM 12-40mm f2.8. You'll get some great looking images across a wider variety of focal lengths at the expense of a little bit of light gathering capabilities, but it gets the job done. So tip 3, shoot in RAW. So you've heard it once and you'll hear it again. You must shoot in RAW. It's totally up to you whether you set your camera to produce JPEG and RAW at the same time, but either way you have to shoot RAW. Okay, you have to shoot RAW. Light changes so quickly at weddings and you literally can't control what is happening. So knowing you have some latitude to bring things up or down in post-production is very useful. Not only that, if you'd like to add some color grading style to your shots later, this has to be done in RAW. If you do it in JPEG, things will just fall apart. Tip 4, flicker reduction. So unless you are lucky enough to have a perfectly natural lighting across the entire day, you will undoubtedly encounter a variety of unsavory lighting conditions. It just happens at weddings. So unfortunately, lots of the modern venue lighting setups feature LED lighting that causes flicker in our camera. So without getting into too much in-depth on the topic, flickering occurs when the frequency at which the LED's flickering becomes out of sync with our camera's shutter speed. So you'll start to see some horizontal banding, and this causes the horizontal blocks of light in areas within our exposure. But luckily for us, on many Olympus cameras, we also have a flicker reduction setting. So this can be found in the C1 menu, which you can modify depending on the region of the world you're shooting in. For Australia, who runs off of 50 Hz power, you'll need to set this to 50 Hz. Alternatively, if you're shooting in part of the world with 60 Hz power, then naturally you just need to choose it to 60. Set it to 60. So after you set your power region, make sure you set anti-flicker shooting mode to on, otherwise it won't come on. So you'll know when this is on because a little FLK box appears on the LCD and viewfinder. Looks a bit like this. So one thing to note though, this only works when using the mechanical shutter, not the electronic shutter. Tip number 5, IBIS settings. So Olympus cameras are renowned for their incredible in-body stabilization, especially when paired with a lens such as the 12-100 f4 Pro AS. I've comfortably shot handheld long exposures of around 5 seconds plus. It's insane. But for weddings, you aren't likely to shoot exposures this long, but you will definitely want to turn on the camera's IBIS and just set it to auto. I find that's the best setting. So you can easily find this by pressing the OK button on the back of the camera, navigating to the camera image stabilizer menu, and just turning on auto. So tip 6, exposure warnings. So one of the most valuable visual tools available to Olympus users is the ability to set over and underexposure warnings to be displayed on the viewfinder and rear LCD. So with this feature enabled, anything that flashes red is going to be overexposed and anything that displays blue is going to be underexposed. It seriously is a must when photographing a bride's white dress in direct sunlight. So I want you to write this down, is exposed for the bride's dress, because you do not want that to be blown out. So hit that bell as I'll be releasing a short video on how to set this up, the warnings up in the coming days. So if you'd like to see that, let us know. Tip 7, dual write for SD cards and formatting in camera. So there is nothing worse than capturing someone's special day, getting home and realizing your memory card is corrupted and you've lost all the images. So trust me, I've had a card fail and lost a section the day before, and it was really embarrassing, especially because I consider myself a pro photographer. So for this reason, I highly recommend you choose a memory card of around 128 gigabyte and 170 megabits a second write speed. Buy 2 of them, because 128 gig will be more than enough to cover the day. Even on burst mode, you will have one as backup as well. So there are faster cards, which I actually use myself, but for beginners, the cards in this link will be more than enough and far cheaper. So I'll leave those in a link below to my personal recommendations. I do recommend though getting SanDisk. I've had Lexar ones fail before. If your camera supports dual memory cards, make sure you set it up to dual independent. Okay, that way it will write the image to both cards, simultaneously creating an instant backup, so both going at the same time. So if you only have one card slot, it's fine. I suggest you take your laptop and hard drive to the wedding, and when you have a spare 10 minutes or 5, quickly make a backup of the shots you've already taken. And if you still have plenty of space left on the card, I recommend just leave the shots on there and don't delete them. So now you have a double backup on the hard drive and on the card. Tip number 8, low speed burst. So have you ever been part of a group photo and upon closer inspection you realize your eyes were closed? Or perhaps you see a beautiful moment unfolding and you miss time pressing the shutter and it's gone. Well, unfortunately this happens a lot, and the best way we can reduce this from happening is to shoot in burst mode. Sounds scary? It's not really. Now Olympus cameras usually have 2 burst modes, a low speed and a high. And I've found that low is usually more than enough for 99% of moments that happen during a wedding day. About the only time I swap it to high speed is for things like the first kiss and bouquet toss, which can happen in seconds. Okay, so tip 9, silent shutter. With the advent of mirrorless cameras and electronic shutters, wedding and event photographers around the world celebrated. They could finally move silently around a scene without sounding like they're firing off a machine gun, and I am looking at you 1DX users. Not only is it distracting for the bridal party and guests, it is an absolute pain in the ass for photographers filming letter readings and speeches as it taints their audio. Trust me. So using a silent shutter can be a little strange at first, especially when shooting in bursts, so it's a good idea to always check the back on the screen to make sure you actually took an image. On the other side of that, you need to be aware that if you're using a sling or a harness to support your camera, it's very easy for the camera to bump around on your body and fire off hundreds of images of your feet, using up your memory card. Tip 10, Aperture Priority mode. So while it might be tempting to put the camera into fully automatic mode, it's best to have some control over what the camera is doing. And this was why 99% of the time I shoot in Aperture Priority mode across all my shoots. And this is found by turning the dial on top to A. What Aperture Priority mode does is we set what aperture we want the scene to have, and the camera will choose the correct shutter speed to expose for the image and ISO, but we'll get into that in a minute. So controlling the aperture means controlling the amount of light coming into the sensor. So opening the aperture wider will let more light in, creating a shallower depth of field. Conversely, closing it down will allow less light in, creating a wider depth of field. So if you'd like to learn more about this, maybe drop a comment in the section below and I'll see if I can answer it the best I can. All right, tip 11, auto ISO and minimum shutter speed. So weddings present very dynamic lighting situations, and as a beginner it can be really overwhelming to choose the right ratios between ISO, shutter speed and aperture. So this is why I recommend beginners and even intermediate photographers just set the camera to auto ISO in Aperture Priority mode. You are still a good photographer. So auto ISO mode can be found in the menu system on the M1 Mark III E1. So make sure it is enabled in all modes. Then in ISO auto set, change the upper limit to around 3200 for everything up until the reception, and then I would crank it up to 6400 for the reception and onwards. So trust me, 3200 is well within acceptable noise levels on Olympus cameras, and you are far better off having a sharp and noisy image than a blurry one, trust me. But if you're keen to see how I apply noise reduction to my shots, which I do, drop a comment below and I might make a video about that because it's pretty powerful. But in short, I use the insanely effective Topaz denoise, which I'll also leave a link below. Now the next and very important setting to change is the lowest shutter speed setting. Here you want to set this to 1/250th of a second. This is a widely used minimum shutter speed because it's fast enough to freeze people who are walking and moving at a regular pace. So anything slower and you run the risk of motion blur, so it's a safe shutter speed. So after this, you need to go to your super control panel by clicking the OK button or by holding the ISO button and selecting auto. So now this is set, your camera will automatically adjust the ISO to maintain a shutter speed equal to or faster than that 1/250th of a second. But it is also important to note that when the light becomes too dark and the ISO 3200 isn't enough, your shutter speed will just drop. So this is where you need to keep an eye on it and adjust your aperture or upper ISO limit accordingly to that 6400. All right, tip 12, back button focusing. So another extremely useful feature of most modern DSLR and mirrorless cameras is the ability to map back button focusing. So normally as you half press the shutter button, autofocus will engage, and you have your finger half pressed, autofocus will stay locked. But by fully pressing, it actually takes exposure. So what we want to do is by mapping the roll of the back button, which is this one here, I'll show you on another camera, as where your thumb would lie, you now have much more control of focus precisely, and you recompose your scene or track a subject more easily without running the risk of accidentally pressing the shutter. There are other amazing benefits of back button focusing that I won't go into, but let me know if you'd like to know more, and I might make a video on that as well, or actually how to set it up. So tip 13, continuous autofocus and release priority. So it would be fair to say that 95% of wedding day I am utilizing the camera's continuous autofocus setting. So about the only time I use single point autofocus is for static shots such as the ring or reception where there's no movement. But even then I kind of just leave it on continuous and use back button focusing. It just makes things pretty easy. But when using continuous autofocus, whatever you have the button pressed down will automatically lock and maintain focus on whatever is inside that point, or group of points for that matter, and you'll just have to move the camera to keep your subject within the focus point. People are rarely stationary, even when sitting or standing, so continuous autofocus will ensure your shots are tack sharp. So now you can go one step further here and set your camera's autofocus priorities, which can be found in C1 of the menu on the EM1 Mark III. So set your single autofocus release to on and continuous auto release to off. This tells the camera that when using single, if the camera hasn't quite found the focus, the shutter can still be pressed and the exposure is taken. But with this set to off for the continuous shutter, it cannot be pressed unless the camera is locked on good focus. So it's invaluable in situations like where your bride and groom are exiting the ceremony and the release priority of the continuous autofocus is set to on. You may be fooled to thinking that shots are in focus when actually they may be all completely out of focus because your camera's still shooting. So with this release set to off, you'll immediately know that the camera's struggling to lock focus because it's just not going to take a photo. And you can quickly switch over to manual focus and salvage the moment, hopefully. So it's definitely something you want to practice with and can mean the difference between getting a shot and not. And that goes across all types of photography. So I found though when shooting inside churches or dimly lit receptions, the cameras just can't pick up on the subject. So it's basically screaming quickly do something different as this is just not working. So that's where manual focus can come in handy. Okay, tip 14, focus patterns and face detection. So like most modern DSLR cameras and mirrorless cameras, you'll have a selection of autofocus patterns to choose from. So each of these patterns favors certain types of situations better than others and varies drastically between the camera models. So you need to practice with it. You'll also find that some consumer and prosumer cameras feature autofocus patterns that don't fill the entire frame. And that can make things a little bit difficult when composing a scene with the subject on the peripheries, so like on the outside. There are 4 focus patterns that I regularly use on Olympus cameras, and those are the full coverage, the box, the cross, and single point. So now, while Olympus cameras are renowned for their autofocus speeds and their face detection is pretty damn decent, in particular on the EM1 Mark III, it doesn't always get things right because it's a computer. So for this reason, I tend to stick with 2 patterns throughout the day, with face detection turned on. So those being the box 5x5 and 3x3 and the single point. So when shooting scenes like bridal and groom prep, reception mingling, couples portraits, I tend to use the 5x5 and use the back button, pad, joystick, or even position over the face of the person I want to target. And it gets it done, because 9 times out of 10, the camera will locate the face of my choice and allow me to take the shot. So for critical moments like during the bride's walk down the aisle, I switch to single point and position this straight over her face. Because if you use a pattern larger than this, you run the risk of the camera locking onto someone else's face, which isn't ideal, like the father or another member of the public. Extras, and these are kind of things that you don't have to do, but they will help you out, and I do them all the time. And actually, you probably should just do it all the time. Great habits, and they'll ensure you get some really good shots. So, tip 15, align your clocks. Sounds strange, doesn't it? But a little pro tip, in the morning before each shoot, head into your camera's date and time settings, which on the M1 Mark III is found in the setup menu, and align your clock to the laptop computer. So you press them at the same time and align it to what your laptop has. So this will not only help you check whether you got the right date and time, but it'll help you find files based on the time of day it was shot. So it's particularly useful if and when you start shooting with a dual camera setup, or for someone else as a second shooter, because your photos will appear in chronological order when viewed in a list. So it helps them match them up easier. Alright, tip 16, aperture choice when shooting. So there is no magic aperture setting that is perfect for every situation, but if you follow these guidelines, they should get you out of trouble most of the time. So for moments where I have a single person as the focus, I almost always shoot wide open at f1.2 on my lenses. So you would just shoot as wide as your lens and light allows for. But for groups of 4 or more where people are standing at different distances from camera, like laid or in a curve formation, I shoot f4 or higher, just to make sure they're front and back sharp. But for the large group shot, I almost always shoot at f8 or f11 to ensure I get front to back sharpness of the entire group, because it's too soft at 1.2. But while we're on the topic of aperture, it's useful to know that while your lens might be an f1.8 in 35mm equivalent, you're actually getting a depth of f3.6 depth of field. You still get an f1.8 amount of lighting through the lens, but the depth will change because of the ratio in 35mm equivalent. Okay, tip 17, reception lighting. So this is a big one. It's well known that micro four thirds cameras aren't the best when it comes to low light photography. It really is just physics. They are good, but they're not the best. So it's true we can get away with shooting at ISOs up to 6400, but in reality the colours become a little muddy and the image is definitely not as clean as it could be. So that being said, being that this is a video for beginners starting out, I highly recommend skip the use of an off-camera flash and invest in some cheap LED panels, light stands and a handful of Sony NPF batteries. Because using constant light, you can literally just set up the light pointing to where the subject is or about to be, and you'll have no issue focusing or capturing an image using the lower ISO settings and in burst. So it's actually my preferred method of shooting these days, as I know exactly what the exposure will be. The only risk you run here though is if the couple ends up appearing in a different direction or location than where you thought it would be, so you have to make sure the light's pointing at them, so keep it close by. But I'll leave links to the cheap lights and light stands I use below. And if you'd like to know more about how I position and use these lights, also let me know in the comments below. So tip 18, practice makes perfect. Finally, this goes without saying, practice, practice, practice. You are being blessed with the opportunity to immortalize a couple's special day that hopefully only occur once. The last thing you want to do is head into the shoot with all of these new settings and not understand what they are doing or how to locate them within the menu system. I think by covering a family event, chasing your kids or a dog around the backyard and within different lighting scenarios is the best way to practice with each of these camera features and settings. And it's certainly what I do. I take it to events and I just practice. And the idea is for the camera to become an extension of yourself, and you can change settings without even looking at the camera. It just becomes second nature. So in closing, it may seem like I covered a ton of different settings and tasks to change and check over. I can assure you that once most of these are dialed in, you can pretty much just set and forget, as these features are transferable across all of your shooting scenarios, especially the back button focusing those exposure warnings. So I could definitely have spent hours deep diving into each of these settings and features, but that would just be information overload. So as I mentioned before, I highly recommend you watch over these once without stopping, then rewatch it again a second time with pauses to dial in your settings and make notes of your findings. And then once you've done this, download the cheat sheet in the description, and you can quickly go over the night before and morning and just check off and make sure everything is set exactly how it should be and squash problems before you actually get there. But as always, if you have any other questions related to this video, Olympus cameras, or photography and filmmaking in general, please do not hesitate to get in touch in the comment section below, and I will answer the best I can. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell if you'd like to know more about Olympus tips and tricks, and I can assure you there are some big, new and exciting videos to come in the not too distant future.